Well, good morning, FCCT. How are you guys doing today? Good, good. Seems like you guys have a lot of energy today. That's great. We're going to be in Ezra chapter 7 today. I sound very boomy, don't I?
Yeah, sounds cool.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. We're going to be in Ezra chapter 7 today. We're continuing on with our sermon series on work, the mighty works of the Lord. The idea behind this sermon series is that God is at work in the world, and God is at work in you. And He's at work in you to turn you into somebody who can be a part of the work that's going on in the world. A lot of times in our culture today, work has kind of a bad reputation, and we're here to try to rehabilitate that reputation and talk about how God's work that He has us to do is a joy to participate in. And so we're talking a lot about work and how it's a joy. Last week we talked about the idea of building walls. A lot of what we're going to do in our work is we're going to build walls. Some of those are physical, some of them are spiritual. But the important thing is that that's a big part of what we do. And today, as we're going to be in Ezra chapter 7, before we get there, I want to talk about a story that I was reminded of this week, and it's the story of a guy named Chandler Halderson, and you might not have ever heard of him. I might have talked about him some time ago, but I was reminded of his story. Chandler Halderson is a guy who's currently spending life in prison, and it all started with skipping classes to play video games. And you might think that that's a weird thing to lead to life in prison, but basically that's what happened to him, is that he's a guy who, instead of going to his classes like he was telling his father he was doing in college, instead of doing that, he was at home playing video games, and he did that to the point where he was no longer taking classes at college. But rather than tell his father that that's what was happening, he kept up the pretense that he was doing this. Well, eventually, that comes to an end, right? You have to, there's a time at which you should be done with college. And so he actually came up with a big story about how he was offered a job at SpaceX, and he was going to take this job. And his dad kept wondering, like, why his paperwork from college was never there. And he was able to kind of explain away the fact that he never actually went to this job at SpaceX by claiming to have been hurt in this incident that happened, and that he was hurt more than had realized, and that he had told SpaceX, their hiring department, about this, and they had rescinded the offer. But eventually his dad got to the point of saying, hey, how come I've never seen a diploma? How come I've never seen any of this stuff? And so his son kept saying, well, I keep calling them and trying to sort these things out, but I never get anywhere. And so his dad basically said, okay, here's the deal. On Monday, we're going down to the school, and we're going to go together, and we're going to solve this thing. And so his dad was at home at 1:30 in the afternoon and said, hey, I'm here. Where are you? I'm ready to go. And that's when Mr. Chandler Halderson came home and murdered his father. And then in order to cover up that, when his mother got home from work, he murdered her as well. And then created this fictitious story about them going off to a cabin, and eventually it was all found out. And the reason that I bring this up is today we're talking about some of the work that we have to engage in, that God is calling us to engage in, and that work is building the city. And by building the city, what we're talking about is we build the community that we live in. That the city is not the buildings. That is important to understand. The city that you live in is not the buildings. It's the network of relationships that you have around you. And so the work that you need to engage in, and you need to engage in joyfully, is building that network of relationships. And when you fail to do that, you're left with very few choices that don't involve terrible outcomes, like Mr. Chandler Halderson experienced. So let's look at Ezra chapter 7. We'll be in verse 25. And remember that we talked about last week that Ezra and Nehemiah originally had formed one book. They're separated into two books in our Bibles, but originally they were scrolls, and they were one scroll. And they tell a story that's kind of one story. They tell the story of three different leaders: Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Now, these three guys are the ones who are returning from Babylonian captivity and trying to help restart the Jewish people in Jerusalem. That's what their goal is, that's what their job is, and they're being supported by some of the Babylonian rulers, both Cyrus and Artaxerxes. They're both supporting these different times. They're supporting this movement of the people to go back and restart the city. And in order to restart this people, they have to do a few things. And the three things that they have to do is they have to restore the temple, and that's what Zerubbabel does. And then they need to reform the community, and that's what Ezra does. And then they have to rebuild the walls of the city. And so that's what we covered last week. Nehemiah is the one who rebuilds the walls. We covered that last week. We're going in reverse order, and I think you'll see why we're doing that here in a minute. But we're going in reverse order here. So today we're talking about Ezra, and Ezra is rebuilding the community. And so let's read in Ezra chapter 7, verse 25. Now, this is a ways after the book starts. Obviously, it's the 7th chapter, and you can kind of read through the book if you want to get a flavor of what's happened up to this point. But basically, what's happened is that the king has said to Ezra, hey, go and do this, and you're going to be supported in your work of doing this. And then Ezra gets there, and it says, and you, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God that is in your hand, appoint magistrates and judges who may judge all the people in the province beyond the river, all such as know the laws of your God. And those who do not know them you shall teach. Whoever will not obey the law of your God and the law of your king, let judgment be strictly executed on him, whether for death or for banishment or for confiscation of his goods or for imprisonment. So basically what the king is saying to him is, my task to you is you're to go back and you're to rebuild the community of people that are there. And we're going to look at this charge that's given to him and what he does in order to carry out this charge. And we're going to look at three things today. We're going to talk about the physical versus the spiritual, or the physical and the spiritual. We're going to secondly talk about why the law. And finally, we're going to talk about the place of grace, because all of these things play a part in rebuilding this community. So let's talk first about the physical and the spiritual. Remember that we talked about last week, Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall. But it's important to understand that while we as modern people, we focus on the physical things, that's not the way that the ancient people saw the world, and I don't think that that's probably the best way of seeing the world. We talk about, well, I'm going to church, when we mean we're going to the church building. But the thing is that this building is not the church, obviously. The church is the people. And the thing is that this building is only a physical manifestation of the fact that there are people here who want to worship God. That's where it came from. You know, if you see up here, there's this stone, and this came from the original building of First Christian Church of Tempe. It's now, if you go up on the campus of ASU, the Chuck Box restaurant actually sits on the original property. And it was started in 1894. And upstairs we've got some pictures of some Old West-looking dudes and some wagons and horses, and they're in the midst of building the first building up there. That's where it started. It started with those people who had a desire to worship God and wanted a place to do it in. And it's taken all this time now down to us, who you guys are now the church here. You guys are now the people who want to worship God and want to do it in this place. But it's important to understand that in modern times we don't often see the connection between the spiritual and the physical. In fact, Bill Gates one time said that church was not a good use of his time resources. The reality is that nothing could be further from the truth. And the reason for that is that there needs to be a reason to do the work that we engage in. The spiritual is always vital, because the spiritual is what provides the motivation for us to do everything that we do. Sometimes people get depressed and they have a hard time getting up in the morning. It's not because there's some physical force usually holding them back. It's because, generally speaking, there's a spiritual problem of not seeing the significance and the worth and the point of getting up and doing the things that need to be done. Everything that we do on a daily basis comes from a spiritual source. Especially in our modern times where there's generally an absence of physical need. I was recently interested in looking at a picture of Cologne Cathedral, if you could bring that up for us. That's Cologne Cathedral. It's a pretty impressive building. What's even more impressive is that they started building that building in 1248. Can you imagine? 1248. Almost 800 years ago. 800 years that building has been standing. But what's even more significant than that is that they started building in 1248. They finished building in 1880. It took them 600 years to build that building. For those of you who have been around for a while, that's about a quarter of the time that we've spent working on the sprinkler system here. 600 years. Imagine how dedicated you have to be to engage in a building program that's going to take 600 years. Imagine that you guys are being asked to give your money to lay the foundation stones, knowing that you will never see that building built. You will be lucky to see anything above the ground level. And that your children won't see it, and that their children won't see it, and that their children won't see it. But you are saying to yourself, it's worth us doing this. And not only are we never going to see this built, and our children won't see it, and their children won't see it, and their children won't see it, but we're assuming that people come after us will see it as valuable enough to contribute their labor for 600 years. The spiritual is vital. Because the thing that you have to understand is that it's not just about the buildings. You see, you live in communities that are formed by institutions that have been around for thousands of years. You're part of a Christian faith that's been around for thousands of years. Who people have said, I will give my life for this, for thousands of years, so that the message could come down to you. If those people hadn't made those decisions, you would never know the truth of the gospel. It would never have been communicated to you. It was only done so because people thought, this is worth my life. You see, the spiritual is at the center of everything. All culture, all architecture, all art, all music, all clothing, anything beyond what is absolutely necessary for us to physically survive. Everything comes from a spiritual source. It comes from belief. It comes from faith. Many of you have heard me talk about an architect named Le Corbusier, who talked about houses being machines for living in. He had a modern desire to contradict the necessity and importance of the spiritual, only saying that we need so much space to live. Everything could be boiled down to the physical. But the reality is that's not the truth of our lives. That the truth of our lives is that everything that we do and everything that we experience in life comes from this foundation of the spiritual and from us making sacrifices for Him. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8, it says, "For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come." You see, when we train our bodies physically, there's value in that. But that value ends the moment that we die. The thing is, when you die, you're dead. You're not like mostly dead if you were really fit and all the way dead if you weren't. No, whether you were super fit or not fit at all, when you die, you die. That's all there is to it. Now, if you're really fit, you might live longer. That date of death might be pushed back from those who aren't as fit. But the end result is that you're still dead. Now again, I'm not saying don't engage in physical activity. I'm actually trying to work on doing more of that myself. But the reality is that if I'm going to do that and not engage in spiritual training, then I'm missing the boat on what really has value for eternity. So Ezra's job is to come and to build the community. It's not enough to have physical walls. It's not enough to have physical rooms to stay in. The community is not made of those things. Those things are the result of community being formed. His job is to come in and to form the community. Ezra is a priest who comes to build that, and the king who sends him is smart enough to know that he is the person for the job. This is a necessary step because the workers who are going to build the wall, we talked about last week, they're going to have a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. That requires dedication, and you're only dedicated when you have a reason to be dedicated. In Nehemiah 4:16 and 17, remember it says that from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each had labored on the work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Imagine how much more difficult the work is to do when you have the load in one hand and a weapon in the other. Why? Because people are trying to stop you. They're trying to kill you. They're trying to prevent you from building this. You only go through that kind of thing when you have a big reason to do it. And Ezra is the guy who's going to provide the spiritual foundation for the community to be built. Now, the second point that we need to encounter today is why the law? Because what's interesting is that this king says, who's the guy to build this community? This guy named Ezra. And he is going to do that by teaching the people the law. Notice it's right there in the text. And you, Ezra, according to the wisdom of your God that is in your hand, appoint magistrates and judges who may judge all the people in the province beyond the river, all such as know the laws of your God. You're going to be the guy who's going to appoint these judges and rulers because they have to know the law of God. Those who do not know them, you shall teach. Now, this is interesting to us because a lot of us don't understand that this is the foundation for community. The foundation for the community is the laws of God. That we often think it's like having nice feelings about people. You know, like if only we have a big enough rack of Hallmark cards available to us, that's kind of what we need to get community going. But that's not enough. It's not even close to enough. The law seems a strange way to us modern people to build a community because in our minds we think, well, doesn't the law exclude rather than include? And the answer is yes. But remember what community is. Community is what people have in common. Community is based on what people have in common. What will the common things be that we build our community on? See, that's the thing that is vital to the nature of our community. Because the thing is, we can start a gang, right? We could start a gang. And we could, when people come through the door of our church, we could say, surprise, and we could jump them into our gang, right? That would be good times, wouldn't it? They weren't. We would need some guidance on this, probably. So the thing is, we could do that, right? Because the thing is that a gang is a community, isn't it? And the gang revolves around something. There's something at the heart of it. Or we could say, when people come into our community, we can say, surprise, we're bowlers. We could take the fellowship hall and we could build a bowling alley in it, and we could say, this is what we're about. This is the thing that we have in common. I've always wanted a bowling shirt with my name on it. Not sure which side it goes on, but you know what I'm saying? Like it has to be embroidered, and we could have a cool patch on the back. We could say, this is what our community is. This is what we have in common. But here's the thing that's important to understand is that all of those things exclude the other things, right? If our community is built on bowling, it excludes something else. You can't come in and say, well, I wanted to have a sewing circle, and that's what I think we should do. We were like, no, that's not what, we're bowlers here. Doggone it, we're bowlers. Get out of here with your sewing circle, right? Now, here's the thing that's important to understand. That's how community functions, is there is something that the community says, this is what we have in common. And it's not like any choice is equal. If you decide to be a gang, or you decide to be a sewing circle, or you decide to be a bowling team, those things are not equal. Like, it's not the same. Like, the things that you choose matter. And that's why building walls is at the heart of what you're going to do all the time. Why? Because you're going to build in, and this is what we are, is what's inside the wall, and who we're not is what is outside the wall. That's what the law does. Now, it's even more important than that, because any community can be built on those things that you have in common, but to build a community that is going to be fruitful, that is going to be glorious, that is going to thrive, that is going to be a blessing, that is going to reach out and be a blessing to the whole rest of the world, you have to have the best thing be the thing that it has in common. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 35 through 40, the religious leaders are in the process of trying to trick Jesus, which they are up to that a lot. And it says one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. You see, what is being said there by Jesus is so vitally important to us, and that is this, that these two laws are the foundation for everything, and that everything else is connected to these two principles. And these two principles are inextricably linked with each other. That's why Jesus, when he's asked what is the greatest, he says, well, this one and this one too, right? Because you can't separate these two things. Why do we need to have the same belief in God? Why can't we just relate to each other? Why can't we just have a community where we just get along? Because it doesn't work that way. What rules will govern our relationship with each other? You see, that's what every community has decided on when it chooses that one thing that everything's going to orient itself around. And the reality is here that what they're going to orient themselves around is the person and nature of the living God. That is going to be the thing that we have in common. We are going to see the living God. We are going to orient our lives around Him. We're going to relate to God first. We're going to ask ourselves the question, who is the living God? Who is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? Who is the great and almighty one who has created everything? Who is He? And that's going to be the center point, and we're going to relate to each other based on who He is. Why? Because you become an expression of that. That's what the community is, and that's why it has to choose that thing that it has in common, because it becomes the expression of that thing. That's what a community is, and that's what a community does, always, every time. If you decide we're bowlers here, you're going to become the expression of that. If you go to a bowling team and they never bowl, you're in the wrong place. You just are. That's the way that it is. We relate to God and we become expression of Him. We image Him. In fact, we are the physical expression of God. That's our job. And that's why the law is important. Because God is what He is, and He is not what He is not. And because our job is to be the physical expression of Him, that means the law is important. The law says this is who God is and this is who He is not. And we say, okay, that's important because my job is to become the living embodiment of Him, to express who He is. And so I need to do the things that He is and not do the things that He's not. Just in the same way, if somebody comes in with a Nerf ball at your bowling team, you say, get that thing out of here. That is not the expression of bowling. That doesn't work. In the same way, it's important for us to understand that the law is the expression of who God is. The Bible says you should not lie because God is truth. The Bible says that you need to be faithful, or you need to not commit adultery because God is faithfulness. Like at every turn, what the Bible is doing is it's telling you who God is by telling you what to do. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27, it says, "Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it." You are the body of Christ. It doesn't say you're trying to be, or we hope you are, or, get with the program. It says that you are that. That's who you are. If you're a Christian, that's who you are. If you are part of His church, that's who you are. And because that's who you are constrained in what you do. There are walls built around your behaviors. And the important thing to understand is because you are the body of Christ, that controls how you relate to the other body parts. You see, this is why these two commands that Jesus gives are intertwined to the point where He doesn't separate them. Because the thing is that if Jesus is the head of the body, if He's the God that you worship, then that means that you are His body, and that means that you must relate to the other body parts in the right way. If you don't, then that just doesn't work. You're not part of the body then. The thing is that all of us have had that experience, right? Where some part of our body doesn't work the way that we want it to. Right? When I was a kid, I was a stomach sleeper. I would sleep with my hands under my pillow, and probably at least 20% of the nights I'd wake up and at least one of my arms was asleep. And I don't mean just asleep a little bit, like tingling a little bit. I mean it was dead. The best nights were when both were asleep, because when one's asleep, you can rub it out, right? When both are asleep, you're just, this is all you can do. I've done this many times in my life. Just trying to get them both working. Whichever one wakes up first can kind of help the other one, right? But when you experience that, it's weird because all of a sudden, like you can send signals to your hand and it's not working. The thing is, it's not part of the body for a while, and it feels really strange. Why is it so important to establish the community? Because the community is the body. In order for them to be what they need to be, they have to treat each other appropriately. To the point where Scripture says, if you don't love your brother whom you have seen, how can you love God whom you haven't seen? That's how important it is. You cannot separate these two things into nice, neat little piles. If you are part of the body, then you are connected to the head, and you have to treat the other parts of the body in accordance with what the head desires. It is vital. Our relationship to God and our relationships to each other are inseparable in that way. If I want to run, my body parts need to relate to each other in a certain way. Now, I don't run anymore. And here's the weird thing. So I have back problems, and running exacerbates them, so I don't run anymore. The only thing that will get me running is if death is at my doorstep. Right? If there's a wild animal, if there's like somebody with, Jason with a ski mask and a big, knife or something, I will run then, but I won't run far. The thing is that I tried to run a while ago, and it was like my body had completely forgotten how to do this. Like none of the parts felt like they were doing what they were supposed to do. I don't know if any of you guys who are older have ever experienced this. It's the weirdest thing because in your brain, you think to yourself, like I see people running and I think, oh yeah, I could do that. Because I remember doing that. But the thing is, the last time I ran, I was probably in my early 30s. When I was running one day, I used to love to run. And all of a sudden, my back went into spasms and I could barely make it home. And I was off my feet for days afterwards. And I had to go to the chiropractor, to the doctor, all that kind of stuff. I had to do all that stuff. And that was the end of my running career. In my mind, that should still work. When I tried to run, it did not. Now here's the thing. That's the body not working correctly. That's the body not being the body. That's the body not listening to the head. That's the body being in wrong relationship to each other. If my body wants to run, the parts have to relate to each other in a certain way. If I want to write a sermon, they have to relate to each other in a different way. Like everything that I do comes from the head and it goes out to the body. And the way that the body relates to each other is dependent upon the way that they're relating to the head. And that's the way that it works with us as a community. And that's why the most important walls that we build are spiritual. Who is God? What is He doing in the world? What part do we play in this? Therefore, how do we relate to each other? The walls that we build are walls around obedience. And that's why it was so important for Ezra to go back and to appoint people who knew the law to be the judges over the community. And those who didn't know the law, his job was to teach the law. That built the community. Now, finally, we need to talk about the place of grace. Because what happens in the story, if you read through it, is Ezra goes back, and he goes and I think he probably was like, yeah, this will work, this will be great. And it didn't completely fail, but it didn't completely succeed either. And this is the great story of Ezra and Nehemiah. So Zerubbabel will do his thing, he'll build the temple, and when he builds the temple, the people are like, really? Like the people who hadn't seen the old temple were happy, but the people who had seen the old temple, the people who had seen the old temple, they just wept. And it was like the Spirit of God hadn't come into the place. And so it was kind of a success and kind of a failure. And then we talked last time about how Nehemiah goes and he's trying to rebuild the walls, and after he rebuilds the walls, what happens is people are using the walls in order to do things that they shouldn't be doing. They're using them to set up, places to sell on the Sabbath and do that kind of stuff. And so he goes around, and remember, he knocks people down and punches them and pulls their hair out and stuff like that. And so that's not exactly a success. And then in Ezra chapter 10, we get a little picture of Ezra's end point here. It says, then Ezra withdrew from before the house of God and went to the chamber of Jehohanan, and I messed that up, the son of Elishib, where he spent the night, neither eating bread nor drinking water, for he was mourning over the faithlessness of the exiles. Now, why is he all kinds of upset? He's upset because in the Old Testament, the Israelites were told not to intermarry with other peoples because they were the covenant people. And you couldn't have a situation where a union was formed out of something that was in the covenant and not in the covenant. You couldn't have that. And so they were told not to intermarry. But what he had found was that all these people that were coming back were intermarrying with the people who were around. And so he's all kinds of despondent over this. And he finally says, you guys got to get rid of your wives. And so some of them do and some of them don't. And like everything else in these two books, it's kind of a success and kind of a failure. Now, we have to understand why that is. Israel's captivity was due to the sin of idolatry that they could just never get over. And the problem was that when they came back, nothing had really changed. They still couldn't get over their sin. They just couldn't deal with it. And the problem was this: how do you deal with people and their sin? Is sin a big deal? Is it not a big deal? If sin isn't a big deal, then why have the ideal in the first place? You see what I'm saying? Like if murder is no big deal, then why say don't murder? Right? If lying's not a big deal, then why say don't lie? Like, are these things big deals or they're not? You see, here's the problem that they were grappling with. Contained within Jesus' answer about what the greatest commandment is a contradiction that undermines everything. It's true. There's a contradiction there that undermines everything. Because remember what he said. The greatest commandment is to love God. Right? What's the second commandment? To love people. What if those people are not loving God? What if those people are not following God? You see, the contradiction inherent in this is the thing that kills every community. It's the thing that kills every single community, is you never live up to the ideal. You never do. You say, we're going to be about bowling here. And then you say, well, why don't we go out to eat after we bowl? Well, that sounds like a good idea. And then pretty soon it's like, well, the bowling alley's full today. Why don't we just go out to eat instead? And they say, okay, well, that's cool. And then you say, well, our bowling alley's closed down, and, it's a long ways to the next one. Why don't we just go and get out? Why don't we just become an eating group, right? And then pretty soon that's what you're doing. That's the thing that kills every group, is that there's always this contradiction between the ideal and the people's ability to live up to the ideal. You either accept the people falling short of the ideal till pretty soon the group is not about that anymore, or you kick everybody out who's falling short of the ideal, and pretty soon there's nobody left in the group. This is the problem. And if you think this is a small problem, it's not. It's a problem that every group deals with. And it doesn't matter what group you're a part of. You're always dealing with this problem. This is the problem that Ezra is struggling with. And in his day and age, there is no answer. You see, the problem is that if Ezra loves God, he has to tell these people, get rid of these wives. But if Israel loves them, how can he look at them and say, take your wives and your children and just throw them out? This is the problem that is inherent and is destructive, and there's no way to deal with it. If you're one of these people who has taken one of these wives and you love that wife and you love your child, you have a choice to make, don't you? You love God and you get rid of them, which means you're not loving them, or you love them and you say to God, sorry. Do you see the problem? Do you see the problem? You see, loving God and loving people turns out to be impossible. You can love God or you can love people. You see, this is the thing that closes out the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. This is why it's not a success. There's no way to deal with the inherent contradictions until Jesus comes. You see, only through the cross of Christ can you love God and love people. There's no other way that you can do that. Jesus is the one that solves the inherent contradiction. You can love God and love people because now loving people who are sinful is also loving God. Because God has loved them. God has sent His Son to die for them. Now, in loving people who haven't yet found the love of God, I'm loving the God who is drawing them to himself. You see, only in the cross of Christ, where the sins are forgiven, can I resolve the inherent contradiction. You see, think about it. Without the cross of Christ, where sins are forgiven, if somebody has sinned against God, how can I love them if I really love God? But now, because Jesus has taken care of the sin problem, now I can love them and love God at the same time. Jesus is the answer to the problem because he allows us to love God and love people. All sin is dealt with, all sin is punished, but it's punished in Jesus Christ, and the community is maintained in him. And so you go from this Old Testament where Ezra says to the people, get rid of those wives, to a New Testament where it says, if you have an unbelieving wife or an unbelieving husband, they are made holy in your faith. You see, Jesus becomes the answer to the contradiction. He is the way that we can both love God and hold up the ideal and love each other who always fail to hold up the ideal. So we talk about believing, belonging, and becoming. And today we want to believe that our relationship with God and others is connected. It's interwoven to the point where it cannot be broken. We want to belong to the community as we enter into a covenant with God. And we want to become a functioning part of the glorified body of Christ by understanding the centrality of Christ in our community. Our community is not built on the law. Our community is built on Jesus Christ.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week, everyone.